An in-flight meltdown turned into a life lesson when a hidden billionaire taught a flight attendant the meaning of humility. The faint hum of the aircraft's engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats for the long-haul flight from Los Angeles to Miami. Among them was Vanessa Grant, a seasoned flight attendant with over 2 decades of experience. Known for her no-nonsense attitude, Vanessa took pride in maintaining order on her flights. For her, professionalism meant efficiency, and efficiency left no room for niceties. In the first-class cabin, everything gleamed with perfection. The polished wooden tray tables, plush reclining seats, and champagne flutes sparkling under soft cabin lights. Vanessa made her way through the aisle, her sharp gaze scanning every detail, her neatly pinned blonde hair a reflection of her precision. Her attention was drawn to seat 2A, where a woman with a quiet presence had just settled in. The passenger, early 40s perhaps, wore understated yet elegant clothing, a soft cashmere sweater, tailored black pants, and simple pearl earrings. She didn't look like the typical flashy first-class traveler Vanessa was used to. Vanessa paused, noticing the woman pulling out a small, well-worn journal from her leather tote bag. She jotted something down, her movements deliberate and calm. Something about her silence and composure unsettled Vanessa, though she couldn't quite pinpoint why. The flight began boarding, and the cabin filled quickly. Vanessa approached the woman. "Ma'am, I'll need you to stow your bag in the overhead bin before takeoff," she said in a clipped tone. The woman looked up, her deep brown eyes locking onto Vanessa's. "Thank you, but I prefer to keep it under my seat," she replied, her voice measured but firm. Vanessa's lips thinned. Rules were rules, and she wasn't about to let someone bend them, not even in first class. But something about the woman's tone lingered with her. It wasn't disrespectful, but it carried an unshakable confidence that Vanessa wasn't used to encountering. But before Vanessa could insist further, an unexpected chain of events was about to begin. Vanessa squared her shoulders, her practiced smile tightening. "Ma'am, the airline has strict policies about personal belongings during takeoff. It's for your safety." The woman's eyes didn't waver. "I understand, but it's not in anyone's way, and it contains something important I'd prefer not to store overhead." Passengers around them began to glance up, sensing the growing tension. Vanessa felt her authority slipping, and she hated the feeling. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice but not her tone. "If everyone started making exceptions, we'd have chaos. I'm asking politely, please place it overhead." The woman sighed, closing her journal. She placed it back into her tote, and with visible reluctance, handed the bag to Vanessa, who slid it into the overhead bin with brisk efficiency. "Thank you," Vanessa said, her voice clipped. The woman responded with a faint smile that felt more like a dismissal than gratitude. Vanessa felt her chest tighten. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but something about this woman's calm resistance unsettled her. As the plane taxied and then ascended into the skies, Vanessa busied herself serving drinks and snacks. She noticed the woman from seat 2A often. She sat with perfect posture, her eyes scanning the pages of her journal or gazing out the window. She didn't complain, didn't make demands. Yet her presence felt larger than life, as though she commanded the space simply by existing. A few hours into the flight, the seatbelt sign blinked off, and Vanessa returned to first class for a routine check. The woman in seat 2A was now seated with her tray table down, sipping from a glass of water. The tote bag Vanessa had stowed away earlier was now back under the woman's seat. Vanessa stopped abruptly. "Ma'am, I need to remind you that your bag cannot stay there." The woman set her glass down. "I retrieved it after takeoff. There's no turbulence, and it's not obstructing anyone. I hope that's not a problem." Vanessa felt her composure slipping. "It is a problem if it disregards policy." The woman raised an eyebrow. Policy or power? The question hit like a slap, though the woman's tone remained calm. A few nearby passengers began to watch with growing interest. Vanessa's cheeks flushed, and she tightened her grip on the serving tray. "I'm doing my job," Vanessa shot back, her voice sharp. "And I expect passengers to follow instructions for the safety and comfort of everyone on board. And I expect respect, even when I don't fit someone's idea of a typical first-class passenger," the woman replied, her voice still measured but now edged with steel. The words stung. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another passenger, a middle-aged man in seat 2C, cleared his throat loudly. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, looking between Vanessa and the woman. Vanessa quickly straightened, forcing a smile. "Yes, everything's fine. Just clarifying some safety procedures." The woman gave the man a polite nod, but said nothing more. Vanessa could feel her authority being scrutinized, not just by this woman, but by everyone around her. The rest of the flight carried an awkward tension in the first-class cabin. Vanessa felt the weight of every glance, every whispered comment, as she moved through her duties. The woman in seat 2A remained composed, but Vanessa's irritation bubbled under the surface. As they approached the final hour of the flight, Vanessa decided to make one last pass through the cabin. She wanted to regain control of the situation, to reassert her authority in some small way. But something about the look in the woman's eyes stopped her. They weren't hostile, but they weren't deferential either. They were unbothered. That quiet confidence again, as though she held a secret Vanessa couldn't begin to guess. And then, just as the plane began its descent, the confrontation escalated in a way no one could have predicted. The plane dipped slightly, signaling its descent into Miami. The announcement from the cockpit came over the intercom, instructing passengers to prepare for landing. Vanessa returned to the first-class cabin, glancing over her checklist to ensure compliance. Her attention was drawn once again to seat 2A. The tote bag was now openly on the woman's lap as she placed her journal inside. Vanessa's irritation flared. She felt her authority being openly challenged, and she wasn't about to let it slide. "Ma'am," Vanessa said firmly, approaching the seat, "we're preparing for landing. Your bag must be stowed." The woman looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "I will put it away in just a moment." Vanessa's patience snapped. "No, you'll do it now. I've asked you several times, and it seems you think the rules don't apply to you, but they do. This isn't negotiable." The woman set the bag on the floor and leaned back in her seat. Her calm demeanor only seemed to infuriate Vanessa more. "What is it with you?" Vanessa blurted, lowering her voice but unable to mask the anger. "Do you think being in first class puts you above everyone else? Do you think you're special?" The woman's eyes darkened. She spoke quietly, but her words cut through the cabin like a blade. "Do you think being in a uniform gives you the right to speak to people however you want?" The surrounding passengers were now fully engaged, their gazes bouncing between the two women like spectators at a tennis match. Vanessa felt the heat rising to her face, but she refused to back down. "Ma'am, I don't know what your issue is, but I need you to follow instructions. If you can't, perhaps you should consider a different mode of travel." The woman gave a small, almost imperceptible laugh, shaking her head. "It's always interesting how people show you who they are when they think you're beneath them." That was the breaking point. Vanessa stepped closer, her professionalism unraveling in a way that even shocked herself. "Listen, I've had enough of your attitude. If you can't follow simple rules, maybe you shouldn't be flying at all." Before anyone could process what was happening, Vanessa's hand lashed out, connecting with the woman's cheek in a sharp, resounding slap. Gasps filled the cabin. The man in seat 2C shot out of his chair, his face a mix of disbelief and outrage. "What the hell are you doing?" he exclaimed. The woman sat still, her hand slowly rising to touch her face where the slap had landed. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes burned with something powerful. Anger, disappointment, and something deeper, something harder to name. Vanessa froze, the reality of what she had just done crashing down on her. She opened her mouth to apologize, but before she could speak, the woman stood, commanding the room with a quiet authority that made everyone stop and stare. "I think you've forgotten who you're talking to," the woman said, her voice steady and calm but filled with an unmistakable weight. Vanessa blinked, confused. "Excuse me." The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek leather portfolio. She opened it and held up an identification card, along with documents bearing an embossed logo that Vanessa immediately recognized, the emblem of the company that owned the very airline they were flying on. "I am Simone Bell," the woman said, her voice carrying through the stunned silence of the cabin. "Majority shareholder and CEO of Bel Air, which, if I'm not mistaken, owns this plane and employs you." The weight of her words hit like a thunderclap. Vanessa's face drained of color as she stared at the credentials. The other passengers looked on, their expressions a mixture of shock and satisfaction. "You're the CEO?" Vanessa stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's correct," Simone said, slipping the portfolio back into her bag. "And while I don't make it a habit to advertise my presence, I also don't tolerate disrespect or abuse from anyone, especially not from my employees." Vanessa's knees felt weak. She had just slapped the woman who owned not only the plane, but likely had the power to end her career with a single phone call. I didn't know," Vanessa began, but Simone held up a hand to silence her. "That's the problem," Simone said. "You assumed. You assumed based on how I look, how I act, that I wasn't important. You let your frustration and your prejudice guide your actions, and now you're standing here, exposed for who you really are." The plane had landed now, and the taxiing to the gate felt like the longest stretch of time Vanessa had ever experienced. The cabin remained silent, everyone waiting to see what Simone would do next. Simone turned to the other passengers, offering a polite smile. "I apologize for the disturbance. Please enjoy the rest of your flight." She picked up her bag and calmly walked toward the exit, her posture as steady and composed as ever. Vanessa wanted to call after her, to beg for forgiveness, but her voice caught in her throat. As the plane reached the gate and the passengers began to disembark, Vanessa stood frozen, replaying the incident in her mind. But the consequences of her actions were only beginning to unfold. As the last of the passengers filed off the plane, Vanessa remained rooted in place, her mind racing. She couldn't decide what was worse, the shame of her outburst or the humiliation of learning who Simone Bell truly was. The cabin crew gathered at the front of the plane, whispering among themselves. They'd all witnessed the slap. The tension was palpable, and Vanessa could feel their silent judgment like a weight pressing on her chest. Her supervisor, a soft-spoken but stern man named Gregory, stepped forward. "Vanessa," he said quietly, his tone laced with disappointment. "Can I speak to you in the galley?" She followed him without a word, her legs feeling like lead. Once inside, Gregory closed the door and turned to face her. "What were you thinking?" he asked, his voice firm but not raised. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but no excuse felt adequate. I lost my temper," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You didn't just lose your temper," Gregory shot back. "You physically assaulted a passenger, and not just any passenger, Simone Bell. Do you have any idea what this means?" Vanessa nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't know who she was." "And that makes it better." Gregory's words stung. "If she wasn't the CEO, would it have been acceptable?" "Vanessa, this isn't just about her position. It's about your behavior." Vanessa felt the tears spill over. "I don't know what came over me," she said. "She was so condescending. She made me feel small, and I snapped." Gregory sighed, his expression softening slightly. "We've all dealt with difficult passengers, Vanessa. But it's our job to stay composed no matter what. You let your emotions get the better of you. and now we're all dealing with the fallout." Before Vanessa could respond, Gregory's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's from corporate," he said grimly. "I'll be right back." As Gregory stepped out, Vanessa leaned against the counter, her hands shaking. She couldn't imagine what Simone was doing now, whether she was filing a formal complaint, speaking to the media, or making calls to corporate. Her thoughts were interrupted when another flight attendant entered the galley. It was Lisa, her junior colleague. "I just heard," Lisa said in a hushed voice. "Is it true, about her being the CEO?" Vanessa nodded, unable to speak. Lisa hesitated before continuing. "Look, I know you're probably feeling horrible right now, but maybe this is a wake-up call." Vanessa glanced at her, confused. "You've always been so strict, so focused on rules," Lisa said. "But sometimes people aren't trying to challenge you. They're just trying to live their lives. Maybe this is a chance to reflect on how you approach situations." The words stung because Vanessa knew there was truth in them. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, but somewhere along the way, she had lost the ability to empathize. Gregory returned, his face grave. "Vanessa, corporate wants a full report on the incident," he said. "And Simone has requested a meeting with you tomorrow at headquarters." Vanessa's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It means your future with the airline is uncertain," Gregory said. "Simone hasn't made any official decisions yet, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility of termination." Vanessa nodded numbly. The rest of the crew began disembarking, but Vanessa lingered, her mind replaying every second of the confrontation. But as she prepared for the meeting, she realized that the hardest part wouldn't be facing Simone. It would be facing herself. The next day, Vanessa sat in a sleek, modern conference room at Bel Air's headquarters. The polished glass table reflected the nervous tapping of her fingers. She'd barely slept, her mind consumed with what she could possibly say to Simone Bell. When the door opened, Simone entered with the same calm, commanding presence she'd displayed on the plane. Dressed in a tailored suit, she carried an air of quiet authority. Vanessa stood instinctively, her voice caught in her throat. Simone gestured for her to sit. "No need for formalities," she said, taking a seat across from her. For a moment the room was silent. Then Simone spoke, her voice steady but firm. "Do you know why I wanted this meeting, Vanessa?" Vanessa shook her head. "To terminate me, I assume," she said quietly. Simone's gaze didn't waver. "If I wanted to fire you, I wouldn't be sitting here. This isn't about punishment. It's about accountability and growth." Vanessa looked up, surprised. "What happened on that flight wasn't just about me," Simone continued. "It was about how you view people, how you treat them based on your assumptions. You didn't see me as a person. You saw me as a problem to be managed. That's a mindset that has no place in this industry, or in life." Vanessa swallowed hard. "You're right," she said. "I let my pride and frustration take over. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Simone studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Apologies are a start, but real change comes from understanding why you acted the way you did, and committing to being better." The meeting ended with a surprising outcome. Vanessa was placed on probation, but offered the chance to attend a training program focused on empathy and conflict resolution. As Vanessa left the building, she felt a mixture of relief and determination. The experience had shaken her, but it also opened her eyes to something she'd long ignored, the importance of humility and treating everyone with respect. Because in the end, true professionalism isn't about enforcing rules, it's about seeing the humanity in others,